today I'm delighted to welcome Mark Leicester. Mark, please introduce yourself.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Alistair. Thank you very much for having me. So, Mark Leicester, I am a managing director at Standard Chartered Bank in the legal team. I head up our group commercial legal team and our legal centres of excellence.
Great, and it's great to have you on board. And I think, we've obviously spent a lot of time together in the past, but one of the reasons I wanted to invite you in to talk today was just, I think you're a relatively rare example of a really successful legal tech project. And I thought it would be really interesting to the listeners for you to just tell us a little bit about that project. Why did you do it? What exactly did you do? What technology did you use? Why was it successful? Over to you, Mark.
Well, it's a great sort of place to start, isn't it, Alistair? That it's a rare example, but I mean, it is
relatively
not easy.
rare.
Relatively rare. But I think that is a good place to start because it is not easy. And I suppose I'm going to talk about it probably from a couple of angles, because the legal technology part of what we did was not the only change journey that we've been going on. And where we sort of first started with this was how we set up our centre of excellence model, our legal centre of excellence model. So I'll start with that. And I think also I'll talk a bit about the actual tech change as well, but I want to put a particular focus on this around leadership and the leadership component of it. So just a bit about what we did. So I mean, we're quite a large legal function. So at Standard Chartered, as a bank, we are present across Asia, Africa, and Middle East. Quite a unique sort of geographic footprint, and a kind of key part of the business is connecting those markets into sort of business flows and trade flows from the UK, US, Europe. So we have a legal team that is present in a lot of those locations. We're in 52 different locations as a bank, and certainly in the kind of the sort of enterprise sort of part of the function, had the classic problem statement of ever increasing demands on for support, the sort of transactional volumes going up and up, the need for advisory support going up and up, with a legal functional budget that was relatively flat year on year. So the sort of key question was, well, how can we do more in that operating environment? So we set up a centre of excellence target operating model, initially in Malaysia, but we've now grown that to have teams in India, Poland, and China as well. And that was a big change for the function. Not a big change at the bank level, because actually the bank has big operational hubs in those locations. So we were fortunate to be able to leverage off that infrastructure, but very much a greenfield, setting up completely new teams, new operating model. And we went into that saying, let's just think about this differently. We've got a chance to start from scratch. Let's put new ways of working. Let's put data and analytics, process design at the core of everything that we do in how we deliver our legal services. So that was a really good place for us to start, to set up the foundations.
Can I just interrupt and ask, what kind of time scale, how long did that take? Because I think that's something that a lot of people underestimate.
Yeah. Well, I won't talk so much about all of the sort of the pre kind of planning and sort of analysis and debates that went into sort of things prior to decision making, because you have all of that as well. I mean, so yeah, I think everyone will have their own.
Even that's helpful, because I think in legal tech world, actually, and many of the listeners will have experienced this, that there's often something seems like a very obvious idea, well, it's let's do more for less, let's digitize, let's improve our processes. But I think there's a lot of frustration about how long it actually takes. Yeah, bear all warts. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, quite a lot of planning that sort of to went into that, Alistair, and trying to work out what that model should look like, what's the right location, what's the people strategy, how do we start this? Is it a big bang? Do we sort of start small and iterate? And I think what we found was you can plan and plan and plan for something like this, but the benefit of just getting something started and to then get the lessons learned from something as you iterate was really beneficial. So I think we had been planning to try and do something bigger, but then that got caught up into how do we get the budget all in place? How do we get everything ready to go live in one big go? So we were tactical. We had a bit of budget that we could use to bring in 2 people initially, which we did in January 2019. So the first 2 people into the team in January 2019 started to then sort of prove the use case, the benefit of that operating model, and then wherever we had the opportunity to hire, reutilizing existing budget, for example, from some of the other teams, we then used that to start to grow the team. We then got to a point where we could hire more people, as a more strategic sort of change. But starting small and iterating and learning from the lessons really helped. You've got to start somewhere. And so throughout 2019, we were growing in that iterative sort of fashion. And then when we got to 2020, we were able to grow it a bit more strategically.
And it's interesting as well. I think our interaction started when I received, or my company received an RFP for the services relating to your project. And I think I've told you this before, but I was actually quite shocked about how well thought out everything was. It was very clear that you'd done a lot of thinking into what you wanted to achieve, how you wanted to achieve it, even down to I think part of the brief was, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but from memory, it was divided into kind of different clusters of activity. And I think there are even some process maps available even at that stage. So I just want to make the point that, as I said right at the start, it's a great implementation. It's working for you, but I think behind every great implementation, there's a real backstory. And I think this is a point I really want to get across to the listeners. So keep. I mean, I know, you mentioned hiring a couple of consultants. I know one of them pretty well. I think you did a great job. Tell us a little bit more about that process and then how you got to actually buying the tech.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I think the shouldn't be underestimated the benefit of understanding your process and your data first before you even start thinking about legal technology. And I think that's always a difficult starting place for legal teams because we're not that happy working in a very process heavy environment. It's not what you're trained to do in a law firm, and lots of in-house legal teams have historically not had access to dedicated technology, so you don't have great data. So that was why we went into our Centre of Excellence model with those principles at the core. So we started, for example, before thinking about legal technology, just by using SharePoint and embedding a simple Excel tracker document into a slightly more dynamic SharePoint environment, gave us a very rudimentary matter management tool. So from day one, we were capturing data about the work we were doing. That became really, really valuable when we started thinking about proper legal technology. We spent a lot of time thinking about our end-to-end process and how do we interact with all of our different stakeholders within the chain for the contracts that we were supporting within my team. So we utilized some internal tools for that. So different methodologies within the operations teams and the technology teams within the bank, where we were able to leverage some of that design thinking to map out process. we also worked with a legal consultancy at that stage as well, and helping us to sort of think about the different components of our process. So a lot of those building blocks at the early stages, Alistair, which was so important. We did all of that, long before we were thinking about legal technology. We knew we wanted to enable all of this with legal technology at the right time, but spending the time and the energy just getting the basics right just puts you in a much better place for when you are bringing in the technology. And I think if you don't do that, the issue is you are just going to have to catch up on it, and that will probably delay your technology implementation. You might find actually it's not really delivering for you on day one, and it will take you a few more kind of versions of your use case to get there. So that would be my guidance to people, is to do the hard work up front, and that will save you a lot of time later on.
I think also it's probably worth mentioning for the benefit of the audience that working in a bank, it's quite a restricted environment, isn't it, in terms of how quick, there's a lot of governance, process, regulation. It's interesting because I come from a retail background, and my approach to things was necessarily quite different, but also I was probably working in a much more open environment where we could just try stuff until it worked, and then and we could quickly reject. Whereas in a banking, we work for lots of banks now, and I guess one of the points that I'm really conscious of is all the time is that it is actually quite painful to get to the point of introducing a new technology into the business, and all of the data security concerns, all of the approvals are required, and so it's not something that you'd want to do lightly. You would want to take your time over it. But I'm interested to get your perspective at this stage, without wanting to derail you too much. But if you were working in a more open environment, do you think there's some benefit to just digitizing, just trying a new technology as a catalyst for change, or would you go with the same approach that's worked for you to date? I'm interested in your perspective.
Yeah, I think I would go with the same approach. I think you can't underestimate the benefit of just doing some of that hard work up front, Alistair. I think if you're in an unregulated environment, you could probably start your technology journey a bit sooner. But just some of the basics of thinking, actually, well, what is your data strategy going to be? How do you really want to use that legal technology? Do you really understand the data kind of taxonomy that's used within your business? How are you aligning that with what you're doing in the legal function? And do you really understand your process? I don't think you can bring in legal technology unless you understand your process. So I think I would do all of that in the same way. And you're right. Maybe in the banking environment, it forces you to be even more granular with that level of analysis. But yeah, I think you've got to get the basics right first.
Well, I didn't want to give a spoiler until I'd heard your answer there, but I actually think that working in the banking environment does actually bring with it a degree of discipline, which I think if you applied that to other non-banking legal tech projects, I think it would be most helpful. We have developed a sideline business effectively in rescuing failed CLM implementation projects, and probably one of the distinguishing characteristics of those projects is when we land and we start turning things over and asking questions, it's often quite challenging even to get an answer to the question like, why are you doing this? What's your objective? What's your North Star on this project? That even that is often not clear. And so actually, if you go beyond that into that's interesting. You collect 50 data points about each contract. Why do you do that?
Yeah,
I have no idea. And I think the other thing that's characteristic of enterprises is, and we haven't actually experienced with you, but most enterprises go through a lot of change. So if you look at most of our long-term projects, we might have been dealing with 3 or 4 different stakeholders over a 5-year period, effectively managing the same implementation. So I think actually having the documentation, having the planning, having the process mapping as a reference point is extremely helpful. And as I said, I think it's worth repeating though, every great implementation has a strong backstory. So I think it's worth stressing.
and I think that's where the leadership piece also comes in, Alistair. So actually, what is, you mentioned the North Star. So being really clear with yourself and within the functions. What is that North Star? What's the vision and the purpose of the change that you're making, and what does that journey look like across a 1, 2, 3 year time horizon? What are the things that might disrupt some of those time horizons as well as you think about it? And I think that leadership needs to come from within the legal function with this sort of change. You can't rely. That shouldn't be something that you're looking for your technology or operations teams to do for you. And so I think that strong leadership within the function driving the change is really, really important. And if you've got a legal operations team, then fantastic, that they are critically important to it. But I think you also need that leadership within the teams who are going to be using the technology. And that North Star, so we had that principle. We had we sort of had our kind of roadmap and the different kind of areas that we were hoping the technology would support us. And we kept on coming back to that. We managed to get it onto a nice kind of single slide sort of diagram. It was a great sort of talking point for briefings and internal communications. And we kept on coming back to that.
Decision making also.
Yeah.
Because I think, when I think back to the project that I did at ASDA, which kind of got me into this, and then later the public example of the Unilever project, which has been so successful. In both cases, we had a very linear objective, and so and the governance around the project was very focused around that objective. And I think that if I think about how it's a side example, but if I think about how I think about things in my new role at Concilio, we make decisions based on revenue effectively. Should we sponsor an event? Well, what's the revenue impact, for example? So that's I think that's an important point. It kind of makes that decision process easier. But conscious that we've talked for a while, tell us a little bit about, from technology perspective, what did you deliver? What technology did you use? Why did you choose that technology?
Yeah. So we're using HighQ, so Thomson Reuters HighQ, and we use that for. Well, if I go back a step, we'd made the strategic decision to say, center of excellence model. That's really people, process, sort of data and analytics at its core, and then
sure.
How do we overlay that with a core piece of technology? The use cases are going to be contract based, but we do a lot of other work within the center of excellence. So what is a sort of a platform that can give us optionality, flexibility for that transactional use case, but also gives us matter management, gives us document repository, gives us good analytics, and is quite adaptable for use cases that we haven't yet thought about. So we spent a lot of time looking at the market and chose HighQ with Thomson Reuters. I'll take you through just how we're currently using it, and then we can talk a bit about
quickly before, but why HighQ?
Yeah. Why HighQ? So for us, well, I think for all of the reasons I've just sort of was articulating, but I think where it really works for us is it's got a really simple and easy to design and use workflow. It's got the Contract Express document automation sort of functionality sort of built in,
which is great for complex documents and flexible documents, and potentially in the future, banking documents as well, which are super complex.
Yeah, and I should say we're using this for within my team for vendor contracts. It works really well with a vendor contract use case. So we've got lots and lots of requirements that have to go into those vendor contracts, which are regulatory driven or operationally driven from a banking context. And that's a big part of the lawyering that the team is doing on those contracts. Then you add on other areas like outsourcing, and so there's quite a sort of checklist heavy area, but actually these are also heavily negotiated. So great for streamlining your templates, great for then creating clause library around all of those provisions, great for a strategy around sort of data and the analytics that you want to get over the terms and conditions that are in your contracts. So for all of those reasons, it works really well for us. We use it as a front door, so all of the requests for legal support come through a front door. We use HighQ for the front door. So again, that is great for a high volume environment. We deal in a very large number of these contracts annually through the Centre of Excellence team, and so it works really well for all of that. When we were doing this, artificial intelligence wasn't really top of the agenda, because it was before all of the excitement around generative AI. You did have some narrower AI capabilities already within the product, but obviously also elsewhere in the market. But at that time, that narrower AI wasn't really delivering a great deal of a solution for us in terms of what we wanted. I think now what's is very, very interesting, with what's happening around generative AI is obviously that what's next in that technology journey. And I think Thomson Reuters has also got an interesting kind of proposition around how you bring together the CLM, knowledge management, and generative AI, which is quite an interesting use case proposition. So I think it for all of those reasons, actually it continues to be quite a relevant sort of offering for us.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I think you described it really, but I just think with HighQ, what I really like about it, a couple of different things, but I love the flexibility. So because you were covering, I think your various use cases as outlined in the original RFP document that I described earlier didn't kind of fit easily into any one of the myriad of legal tech products out there. But I like the fact that HighQ is really flexible. You can adjust it. You can, it can cover a lot of different areas. And then I also quite like, I think Thomson Reuters has a pretty strong product suite as well. They've obviously recently acquired CoCounsel, which is very strong from an AI perspective, and they have their own doc intelligence AI products as well. So you can see that they're bringing, plus the subscription stuff is unparalleled. So without this being a TR advert, I think I think it is a strong all-rounder. And so it struck me as a sound product choice when I first looked at it. Yeah. So onto I guess, I mean, you've been describing what you've actually delivered. You've already described what you actually delivered, but I'm interested in, have you been able to kind of demonstrate impact, and then how has it been received from the business and your colleagues as well?
Yeah, and I think, and this is also where I think that the whole leadership piece becomes really important. When you're delivering a change like this, and we were lucky as well, because we were able to sort of say, actually, we're going to ring fence this in relation to the work the legal team is doing. That made it much easier, especially in a complex environment like a bank, where the technology architecture is obviously varied and quite complex. But we were able to say this use case is about what the lawyers are doing, and that made it much easier to plan this. It was owned and controlled by the legal function, designed specifically for us. But that being said, we're still in touching on so many other people's processes, people and tools. So just a really critical piece there around how you take the wider organization along that change journey with you, the communication that you're having with all of those other stakeholder groups, to bring them along on that journey. and then involving them, keeping them included. So obviously getting their feedback, even though they're not using the tool. We invited a number of other teams into our user acceptance testing, for example, to sort of keep that inclusion going, and then also got some great feedback from all of that. I mean, in terms of impact, definitely seeing the impact and the benefit for it. It's really hard, I think, to kind of say upfront, this is exactly what it's going to deliver, and to put some really hard sort of objectives and metrics around it from the outset. There is a little bit of a leap of faith, I think, when you start to use technology like this for the first time. But as you start to mature in using it, that's when you can get more precise about those key objectives and deliverables. I mean, I think from an impact perspective, it's really helped us from an efficiency and a productivity perspective, undoubtedly. And actually, what's happened, in the time that we've been using technology is that the demand has continued to go, up and up, much faster than our supply. But by having the right operational model in place, by having the technology in place, we've been able to meet that demand without it being as big of a resource problem as it would have been without it. So it's definitely helped us in that respect. Having the data is just so important for me, and then for my management team, the other people leaders in the team. We're just regularly looking at that data that we can see from the tool. And then it allows us just to have conversations that we just weren't having before back into the business. And we can, actually having data with a conversation with anybody from the business just changes that dynamic entirely. To say, I can show you that increase in demand. Whereas before we had this, it was always anecdotal. It would always be, well, the legal team is telling us this is happening, but it's completely changed that dynamic, and quite a lot of the headcount growth that we've been able to have in the Centre of Excellence has come from our ability to have those better conversations with the business, to really show that year-on-year trend, that monthly trend, to really delve into actually what are the different types of arrangements that are coming through, and to then relate that back into the bank strategy in this area. So definitely a lot of impact in that respect, and I think sort of where we are now, and being a bit more mature with this use case, is, well, actually, how do we now really leverage this for further transformation? The whole agenda around generative AI, we're in just a much better place now because we have so much data, and that's data that's within the legal function, where we can really think about how does generative AI really kind of support what the function is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, even with a fairly cursory understanding of what you guys have done and achieved, I can imagine that there's so much to go at in that respect. First of all, probably using generative AI to improve that user experience and how to get to the right answer. The drafting point is obvious. Your template is quite complex, and you probably have to take users through a decision tree at the moment, or you will take them through a decision tree. But we've been doing a lot of experimenting with how you can significantly speed up that process. And actually, even what's quite exciting is using some of the user data to understand the type of contract and the user's geography, what team they normally work for, what contracts, so that you can get the AI to make intelligent suggestions, which I think is very exciting. And then the data itself is, I love this, and we've already been doing a lot of work on this, but you give the AI access to data, you give it some instructions, some parameters, and it will produce these lovely reports for you, which I think is fantastic. We're living in a different, I remember back in my ASDA days being, I used to dread being asked for a report on anything because I couldn't find anything anyway. This goes back in server-based days. It really is a completely different world now. So just to wrap up, I mean, would you do it all again, or first of all, and second question is, if you were going to do it again, would you do anything differently?
I mean, absolutely, we'd do it all again. I mean, there's so many lessons learned along the way, Alistair. So, but I think I'd come back to, there is an element of leap of faith with this, you've got to have a strong foundations on your strategy. What's the change that you really want to sort of deliver, and looking at it through those different time horizons. But getting something off the ground, does require that first step. So we'd definitely do all of that again. I think things we could do to have made it faster and simpler. And then what this isn't our only use case, so we're starting to think about what are the future use cases, and as we build out what we're doing in the Centre of Excellence. So starting to go down that journey again, and actually that's the great thing about these tools is you have your initial use case, but that is only the beginning. Once you've got it in, you can then really sort of work out how you're going to scale this and use it more widely. So it's a constant journey, and I think that's been one of the interesting things for us as well. Is it isn't just a project to bring in a tool like this. It's really becomes part of your BAU within the team. It creates different roles for people within the team. It's great for sort of people's growth and development and different sort of almost career paths within the team. So it's become a sort of a very important sort of part of just how we operate in the team.
I think it's really important. I think my experience would ally with that, which is it's quite exciting. It adds another string to people's bow. I think I think that's really important in terms of getting the team on board. And lastly, I did say that the last question was my last question, not live. But you obviously work closely with Alfie and the rest of the site team on that. I'm interested in why did you choose to work with an implementation partner, and how did you feel that we added value? I say we, I didn't actually do any of the work, but how did you feel that we added value?
Yeah, well, it's a really important question. Actually, we could spend a lot more time talking about this, but I suppose, I mean, these tools are complicated. We're very lucky. We have a fantastic legal operations team within the legal function at the bank, with great people who partner with my team and the wider function really, really well. We've obviously got a very large technology and operations team within the organization, but even with all of that existing infrastructure that you have within the bank, there is always, I think, a component which goes beyond those skill sets. And so we sort of recognize that as part of our planning, and concluded that yes, absolutely, we need a bit of external help with the design and build to get us across the line. And I think then the interesting piece, then again coming back into the BAU domain, is this just continues. Actually the day two element of these tools, you've got to constantly keep it relevant. Things are changing all of the time, so it does become a really important part of BAU and working out what can you do internally. And you can do a lot internally, and that's got to be your strategy, that you can do a lot internally. But where might you need some additional support is really important as part of it, as part of the strategy. And that I would definitely sort of give that guidance to people starting on their legal technology journeys, is to really think about what your target operating model is going to be internally. What does the legal team need to do? If you've got a legal operations team, then great. What are they going to do? How are you leveraging those other teams? Because it's both the project, but for the entire life cycle that you're using the technology. So and I think from day one we were aware of that. I think we probably had underestimated the amount of work that would be involved throughout, and that's been the learning journey for us as we sort of then developed those capabilities and roles within our internal teams.
Yeah, I think you made some good points there, and we touched upon it earlier. But I always think there's a few factors. So we talked about bandwidth earlier, didn't we? And that's a key thing. Most people within the bank, even in the legal ops team or the technology team, they'll have day jobs and regular responsibilities, and this technology is quite complex. I think it does help to get people on board who are just doing it every day. The members of my team are real experts in the various different aspects of the technology. I think that's helpful. And then the other thing as well is you're kind of crowdsourcing experience as well from other people who've used the technology, because I think we why fail when you can learn from someone else's failure effectively. I think that's the key point, is we've probably seen all the wrinkles and all the things that the technology can't do. And it's really, I think another thing where you guys have been really good, which actually we've not discussed, but as I understand it, you were very receptive to our suggestions about how to do things. And sometimes customers can be quite rigid and no, it must be this. I was actually talking about it just yesterday, where there's a version of Legal Tracker that's been so heavily customized that it doesn't really work properly. And I guess I would always steer a customer away from that and say, you don't really want to go down the development cul-de-sac. So I think that's a really important point about being receptive to best practice and benefiting from the experience of the consultants that you engage. So
I think so. You've got to know the things that you don't know and have that self-awareness. And so we definitely benefited a lot from working with your team there. And I think, selfishly for us as well, it's a great way for us to, I think, accelerate, our learning by the osmosis of having exposure to teams like yours, Alistair. Because I do think this is such a critical skill now for lawyers. Yes, we've got, if you've got the benefits of a legal operations team, but I think for all lawyers, we will be technology enabled in some shape or form. And that's only going to accelerate now with generative AI. So actually building that skill set, I think, is a core component of what a lawyer of the future really needs. And so it's quite difficult to learn that. I think you've got to put, you draw on all of the levers available to you.
Well, I mean, just talking about osmosis, but the number of my ex-colleagues who are now working for my customers is quite large. The alumni is strong. So so great. We'll wrap up on that point. Thanks so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure as ever. And look forward to meeting you again in person soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alistair. Thank you for having me.
Bye.